a lot of sins.
Sure,
At least
sure.
Ron Paul understands this.
And the establishment, doesn't want to go in that direction because they get first use of that 0% money and then get to loan it out. But they are basically like the snake consuming itself. In the end game, it's terrible. How do you think then the constellation of special interests that control Washington and Europe, knowing, researching what they're going to do so you can make your financial decisions, how do you see them responding? Because I see them getting ready for collapse, civil unrest, trying to start wars.
They might be, if they're smart enough to understand that's going to happen. But they're just trying to get by election cycle to election cycle. They just want to make sure that they're the ones in office, that they have the power, and they're going to deal with these crises, and they're going to use them as an opportunity to grab even more power and more wealth for themselves. And they're going to blame it all on, capitalism and the inherent failures that we need to rely on government to solve.
When government did
ultimately, the real winners, Alex, in this are going to be the emerging markets, countries like China that are wasting a fortune, propping up our economy, trying to keep us consuming things that we can't afford. We are really screwing up the global economy.
So you agree with Jim Rogers?
Monetary policy.
So you agree with Jim Rogers on that?
Yeah, I mean, that is going to be a giant, like a huge new revolution outside the United States. When the U.S. finally collapses, people think, well, gee, the whole world is going to suffer. No, the world is suffering now. The world is suffering the cost of having to support us, having to keep lending us money, having to keep supplying us with goods and resources that other people are doing without.
But in the short term, do you agree it's going to have some wild shockwaves?
Excuse me?
In the short term, do you agree it's going to have some shockwaves, though?
Well, it's going to have shockwaves, but some of them are going to be very positive for the countries that have been lending us money and supplying us with goods. I mean, their people are suffering now. I mean, you always hear people talk about the fact that Americans are living beyond their means. And a lot of people agree we are living beyond our means. But how is that possible? It's only possible because somebody else outside of America is living beneath their means. And so if we stop living above our means, that means the people who are living beneath their means now can see a big increase in their standard of living because they can start consuming commensurate with their own productivity. So many people are going to benefit when this economic, pecking order reverses. We're way up on the top of the pyramid right now, but we're not going to stay there because we don't belong there. We got to the top because we were the freest people. We were the most productive people. And we did that because we had the smallest government that didn't regulate, that didn't tax, that didn't micromanage. That's not the case anymore. We don't have that comparative advantage in freedom. We're a high tax, high regulated society, and we're mired in debt. And we're simply living off of our past glory, but we don't deserve the status that we have. And eventually, reality is, the perception is going to match the reality. Just like the stock market bubble burst because it wasn't what people thought, just like the real estate bubble burst. This U.S. bubble, this government treasury dollar bubble is going to burst. And when it does, we're going to have to deal with the consequences, which are going to be horrific.
Well, I agree with that. I only got a few more questions, Peter. What's the time? I know you keep saying we don't know the exact times, but if you had to dead reckon, when will everybody basically know that this process you're talking about has played itself out?
Well, when the dollar is no longer the safe haven, when treasuries are no longer the safe haven, I don't know how much longer we have. I think that this is the time period where all the highly indebted sovereigns are having to deal with the consequences of their profligacy. And you're seeing it play out in Europe first. But it's going to happen for the U.S. Look, Japan has got debt problems. There are a lot of governments that have borrowed too much money, and they haven't had to deal with the problem. And now it's happening. It started in Europe. Just like if you remember, how did the mortgage crisis evolve? It started in subprime. And at the time, all the experts, including the Fed and the Treasury Department, said, don't worry, it's contained. It wasn't contained. It just simply moved up the food chain. It consumed all the mortgages, including the prime mortgages, because the problem was the same throughout the mortgage industry. It wasn't simply, the subprime market, but that's what a lot of people thought. That's the same thing with sovereign credit.
So why have they lowered France to our level in credit rating, but then they still say the U.S. is better and everybody floods here? Is it because the United States has the most nuclear weapons?
I don't think that has anything to do with it, but yeah, it's interesting that the dollar is down today, treasuries are up because people are worried that France just got downgraded. They got downgraded to the same level that America is already at. It's so, and the truth is, we don't even deserve the AA plus rating that we currently have. We should have been downgraded many notches below that. In fact, I don't even think we should have an investment grade. I think our debt is junk. There is no possible way we can repay it with real money.
Sure, now, Peter, maybe you missed my point. I mean, obviously, the giant U.S. military, though, and the final equation is probably why our rating is still high. I'm not saying we deserve that, but obviously that fact.
I don't know how our military has anything to do with our credit rating, because if we end up printing a bunch of money to pay our bills and we screw our creditors, doesn't matter that we can blow them up. We're not paying them back. I mean, there is no feasible way.
Okay, then why do we still have that high rating if it's junk, as you say, which I agree?
Well, we haven't. Look, the S&P put AAA ratings on mortgage paper that went to zero. I mean, I think there's a lot of politics involved with these rating agencies. I mean, the government sanctions them. There's not that many companies that are even authorized to rate securities like S&P. So I think they're under a lot of pressure not to anger the governments, and so I think they give them too high a rating for that reason. But look, a lot of people just don't want to admit the obvious, or they're oblivious to it. Just like I said earlier, the Federal Reserve and all their expert economists were on the cusp of the greatest collapse since the Great Depression, and these experts had no idea it was coming. I mean, that's the equivalent of a weatherman not being able to see a Category 5 tornado when it's 50 miles off the coast. Yet these clowns are still in charge of making economic policy. So, if the Fed economists couldn't figure it out, why should the S&P or Moody's economists be any better? I mean, they're getting the people from the same sources.
Let me add this final proviso on it and to get your take on it in closing with a brief mention of Iran and what you think about that. Look, if the State Department, if these major corporations based in the U.S. have been buying off politicians, paying people off, giving them sweetheart business deals, the world is holding all these dollars. They know they've been conned. They know they've been ripped off. They know they're being devalued, but they realize if they stop propping up the U.S., they'll really be devalued. So they're so deeply involved in the Ponzi scheme, just like somebody on Social Security, even though it's going to bring down the whole system, they can't extricate themselves out of it.
You always can. I mean, sometimes you think you're in a trap where you have to throw good money after bad forever. But I think when our creditors really take a look at this, and I'm sure they already have, you take China, for example, and if China has $2 trillion in change worth of our worthless IOUs, and they think, gee, we can't afford to stop propping them up because we'll take a hit on this $2 trillion, well, that means they're going to have $5 trillion. That means they're going to have $10 trillion. They're going to start thinking about the dollars that they're going to own in the future, not just the ones they already own now. It's better to take a hit on $2 trillion than eventually take a hit on $10 trillion. Yeah. So they're going to start to look at it because we are asking them to really, really back up the truck and up the ante and buy in much larger quantities. And of course, it's money they're throwing away. They're not really lending us money at this point. They're giving it to us because we can't pay it back. I mean, yes, they can use their interest payments to buy more bonds, but they can't use it for something that actually benefits the Chinese. They can't take the money and spend it on something they want. All they can do is keep loaning it back to us, and we buy the stuff that we want. But it's not helping the Chinese.
It's amazing. Well, very interesting points, and the clock is ticking on this situation. It is a time bomb, obviously. In closing, any thoughts on Iran and how those escalations?
Look, it's just a shame that we're in so much trouble financially. Yet we stir up so many hornets' nests over there in the Middle East and just make more problems for ourselves to have to deal with. We're already broke. The last thing that we can afford is more military expenditures when we're already spending too much money on it as it is. I mean, that's where Ron Paul's got it right. right, and I think other than Rick Perry, he's the only Republican candidate that actually served in the military. All these other chicken hawks are out there talking about we need to go to war when none of them actually are, served. But Ron Paul understands what it means to defend his country, and he doesn't want to just escalate overseas wars that actually make the country less safe. Wants to promote national defense. And so this is just another example of the blowback that Ron Paul has been warning us about. And people try to spin that against him as if he's trying to blame the American people for the problems. Look, he doesn't blame the American people, but he certainly thinks that our leaders have bad policy, and our foreign policy has been bad, and it has contributed to a lot of the resentment that's felt around the world for the United States. That we should rethink that type of foreign policy and be more concerned about defending America, especially not from the Middle East, but from Washington, D.C. I mean, that's where our greatest threat to our liberty comes from. It doesn't come from without. It comes from within.
No kidding. Look at the NDAA, all of it. Peter, I'm about to end the show. Let me say bye to you here in just a moment.
Well,
thank you. Folks, that was an amazing interview with Peter Schiff. We'll be back this Sunday on the syndicated radio show 4 to 6, back Monday 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., and, of course, back here next Monday night, Lord willing, at 7 a.m. Central. That's it for this Friday, 13th, 2012 edition of Infowars Nightly News. Great job to the crew and great job to all the subscribers at InfoWarsNews.com. I'm Alex Jones, signing off.